Hi, everybody. It is 3 o'clock by my watch, so I think we're going to get started. We're here today to talk about collaboration through integration, the key to transparent OA funding eligibility. Really exciting stuff here. I am Shannon Reville. Did that advance? How are we doing? Oh boy.
You fell into the curse.
I've been ruined. Hold on, here we go. Oh, beautiful photo for you all. Oh no.
This is the presentation, everyone.
Oh,
We're going to
no.
talk about how good the
We
day
were
is.
so
Yeah.
set, ready to go.
Oh, here's our.
Yeah, it's just this. We're paid session, but we want to really make sure everyone leaves here feeling good.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, please. Yeah,
You always have to have a tech problem, right?
Took it on as the other slide.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, I need to reset your display settings real quick.
Oh, wait, now it's there.
Okay.
Oh, don't look at my background. So many files. I swear I'm more organized than that. Okay, here we go. So I'm Shannon Reville. I am the product manager at CCC for our Rights Link for Scientific Communications product. And I'm joined today by Pierre Montagano of Aries Systems and Josh Dahl from Scholar One, two of CCC's longtime partners in the submission space. Of course, goes without saying, we're all going to follow the SSP Code of Conduct and core values. Now, Rights Link for Scientific Communications is a very dynamic system that supports publishers in the collection and management of their APCs. Now, as you can imagine, that process has become ever more challenging in the past several years as publishers transition their business to be more OA forward and have engaged in transformative or other OA agreements with institutions around the globe. Rights Link actually expanded several years ago to include a broad set of agreement management capabilities that aim to ensure that every author, whether they are funded or unfunded, is going down the right path and greeted with the appropriate avenue for APC payment or a funding request. And we even do try to automate that process. Actually, Anna Jester mentioned it, and if you were in her session from eJournal Press, she mentioned our touch-free workflow where we can submit a funding request on behalf of the author when we recognize a match to agreement funding, which we of course promote very heavily to reduce burden on the author. And I say all of this just to provide a little bit of context for this slide. With every manuscript that we receive, Rights Link is running a bunch of logic to ensure that the authors do go down the right path. And since our inception, API-based integrations have been an integral part of our platform's success. So when we first built Rights Link, right away, we forged partnerships with leading submission partners like Aries and Scholar One. And metadata is a key component of our ability to calculate all of our publishers' unique APC prices. Nowadays, whether it's data coming into Rights Link, like manuscript metadata from Aries, Scholar One, Scholastica, eJournal Press, all of our submission partners, or data that comes out of Rights Link into systems like the OA Switchboard, it's consistent and reliable metadata that continues to be a critical factor in getting funded and unfunded authors down the appropriate path, enforcing the right agreement eligibility criteria, and really fueling other downstream systems and reporting that support all scholarly communication stakeholders. So what we've known since those early days when we first formed partnerships with submission platforms cannot ring any more true today with the adoption of transformative agreements. Interoperability and data sharing between complementary systems is paramount to supporting the advance of open access. Now, we've been getting data for years. The question is, how useful is that data? And if you look really at anything that we're working on at CCC on the Rights Link platform, you'll see that data quality is everywhere. So I did just want to share a few examples. I'm not going to speak too much about these, But these are some things that we've developed within the RightsLink family of products recently. So the first thing we just launched a couple of months ago is our easy posting and editing capabilities. So for publishers who experience issues with their metadata by the time it gets to RightsLink, and maybe it's past the point of no return in upstream systems, we've created some opportunities for them to come into our workflow and edit their metadata to ensure that the author is indeed getting the right funding options and the right APC pricing. We also created this as a posting mechanism for smaller publishers where the technical API-based integration just really isn't feasible. So we want to make sure we're not stage gating adoption of really wonderful market standards because of technical limitations. And then in September 2022, we launched our new sister product, OA Agreement Intelligence. Publishers and upstream systems have been working to improve the collection of affiliation identifiers for some time. I know some of my friends here are going to talk about that soon. But we know that lots of historical articles that are super relevant to the modeling of transformative agreements don't have that affiliation data. And publishers are looking 2, 3, 4, I've heard of even 5 years back at articles, and they're just at a loss for where those articles were coming from. And so among many features, one of the best things I think that OA Agreement Intelligence does for publishers is connect their historical articles to consistent parent level Ringgold identifiers using a variety of data points. We use billing information, any author information that we have available to make the most reliable match. And that really allows publishers to model new or renewal agreements using just better data from historical articles. And then lastly, you guys all have some little sheets on your chairs. I want to mention a really wonderful project our Publisher Solutions team worked on called the State of Scholarly Metadata. This is a deep dive into the management of metadata throughout the research lifecycle. It outlines key issues that we're facing in our industry and the impacts of those issues on all the various scholarly communication stakeholders. And it's highly visual, it's very interactive. I was super impressed with the final output. And so I encourage you all to go and check that out at copyright.com/state of metadata. So speaking of metadata challenges and the impact of those challenges. So as I said before, we're really working to make sure that every article, every author is given the appropriate agreement or funding source. And we've come a long way. But we still face some barriers by way of OA uptake. So for many hybrid journals, the OA decision is made upstream at submission or in some other pre-acceptance stage. And again, if you were at Anna Jester's talk, her first use case aligns super well with this. So hopefully I'll be connecting some dots if you've gone to multiple sessions on this. Since this decision is disconnected at times from the APC payment workflow, we see a number of retrospective OA situations where the author chose not to go OA, unaware that they had funding available for the APC, which can be a daunting price to your average Joe. So they either don't go open access or later on they select a non-compliant invoice. And all of a sudden, without even knowing, they become ineligible for coverage under the agreement. Now, we know researchers want to make educated decisions. It's a cornerstone of their careers. So we need to create awareness of APC funding and the relative requirements of that funding at these critical decision points. So RightsLink, of course, has this information. We house the agreement eligibility criteria for many publishers, and we've made that available via API. So both Aries and Scholar One are working on integrating with those API methods to try to surface that upstream. And Pierre is going to talk a little bit about the goals behind using that method. So I'll hand it over to my friend Pierre.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Right. So ultimately, Aries is the place where authors are submitting their research, and it's we take quite seriously. It's focused. We're focused on trying to have a very, very positive author experience. And our constituents obviously are very, very attuned to what's happening in terms of their particular article that they're submitting. So we're trying to surface the right information at the appropriate times in the submission process. And this is where this integration is really, really going to help, because we want to surface to the authors based on the Ringgold IDs and the information that we're exchanging with the API, what their potential funding opportunities are. Right. And so the idea is that a lot of times those are associated to the institution that they're at, about potentially paying for their APC, if there's the grants that are available. We want to surface that information, but also at the same time, reduce the friction and confusion. And the hypothesis there is if we're transparent about funding opportunities to authors for OA payments, that we're actually going to hopefully increase the uptake of OA payments, especially in hybrid journals. And on the flip side, talking a lot about authors and the author experience for the publisher as well, provide the publisher with the ability to collect available funding. So a lot of publishers are working really hard building out read and publish deals with different institutions, having sort of that information surfaced so that publishers can collect on the publish portion of the deals that they've instituted with particular universities is paramount, right? And so what are the mechanics of all this in terms of working with the API? And I think that there's two main buckets. And I think it's first is author awareness, right? And surfacing a message in Editorial Manager, and from information that we are getting back from the agreement manager, powered sort of by CC's agreement manager, about the availability of funding, right? And so once we surface that message to the authors about the availability of funding, we also want to be transparent about the parameters around that funding. Maybe, what are the APC charges and what is being covered by the eligibility for potential APC payments. And then the other part is the process, right? And process can be quite complex, right? So I think Shannon touched on a no-touch process where, the article is covered by the APC, the institution is covering the APC, as soon as it's accepted, we automatically can send a notice to that institution, and if accepted, boom, it's sort of a no-touch situation. Other times we have to submit, or the author has to submit, a permission to get that APC covered. So there's a lot of complexity in the process, but I think what's really paramount is explaining what that process might be, depending upon the metadata that we're receiving, the correct metadata, hopefully, from the author about the institutional alignment. And also at this sense, the second bucket I'm thinking about is the requirements, right? What are the requirements in order to meet the eligibility for for this particular funding? And licensing is an obvious one. What license does it need to be? What CCBY, particular CCBY license needs to be? But potentially in the future, there's a lot of talk about things like having available data and that sort of thing. Are there requirements around that? So it's something that we eventually will evolve over time. But surfacing those to the author so that the author makes the right choices about their requirements. Because if they can see that there's available funding and they click, yeah, I want to publish OA, potentially this can be paid for by the institution, and then later on found out that they didn't choose the right license or didn't meet the right requirements, you don't want to go back, and then that makes for a negative author experience. So making it very transparent about what the requirements are.
Yeah. And just to tack on to what you said, Pierre, very great points. I think any of those retrospective OA situations are creating manual work, either for the publisher or even maybe for the institutional customer, who has to recognize that they're now getting invoiced for something that they actually already paid for, right, through an agreement. And so that is going to negatively affect the relationship and potentially a renewal conversation, right? So anytime that we can get, first time right, that's what we have started to say, the better for everyone. And also a lot of times the expectations of these agreements is that everybody's going to go away because they have the funding available to them. And again, that's not always the case. That's not what we're seeing. And our hypothesis, of course, as Pierre said, is that if we're surfacing those options upstream, that we'll see better OA uptake. Now, Pierre also alluded to the fact that, of course, the successful identification of funding is predicated on the collection and use of accurate author affiliations. Ooh, very scary. Now, RightsLink has done our best to support publishers and systems in their transition to collecting these data points more reliably. For example, in the early days when we launched the Agreement Manager, we took a look at our publisher's metadata, and a lot of the time we were only getting an institution name, no identifier. And I have a brilliant colleague named Andy who came to me and he said, can't we use the author's email domain? And that was a real open of the gates for this product. And so we have a lot of publishers who leverage the author's email domain as kind of a secondary option if it does come through in the metadata. But obviously that has its limitations. So we still see, of course, room for improvement. And there's also some nuance upstream. So a submission, Josh and I were just having a conversation about this the other day, may contain a contact author, a corresponding author, a submitting agent. And if whoever is doing the submission doesn't designate that corresponding author correctly, we are off on the wrong foot, right? Also, they may have submitted something 10 years ago and they're using their account again that they haven't used in a while, and they go through and we see an affiliation for a school that they are no longer with. And then, lastly, we also see challenges about the granularity of some of these deals. So libraries have limited budgets. We all know this. The way they're negotiating may mean that certain schools, libraries, departments actually aren't eligible for coverage under the deal. So if we're receiving affiliation identifiers, but at a top level organization and not that granular detail, it makes it hard for us to honor those exception cases. And these things, they really are exception cases. We see a lot of really good matches. I can't reiterate that enough. Our denial rates are like 5%, but we all know that closing that 5% is so hard. And so all these exception cases are super important for us to increase and power OA uptake. So Josh, again, Aries and Scholar One are both working on, improvements in this area. So I want to hand it over to Josh to talk about some of the improvements that Scholar One is promoting around affiliations, but I know he's also going to just talk about data efficacy in general.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Yeah, more musings around some of the things we've been finding over the last 1.5 to 2 years doing redesign and working with Shannon and CCC a lot more closely as we've been planning changes to the integration with RightsLink. And wanted to talk a little bit about 3 different ways we can help to guide authors to the right choices, really. And at the end of the day, we want to make the process as easy as possible. We don't want to complicate or confuse the author. We don't want to overburden them with lots and lots of prompts. But at the end of the day, we also need to get the right data, especially where there's data behind it, like institutions with agreements that we need to match up downstream. So kind of broke it in the thinking into 3 different areas. So one is really around the signposts, and signposts are the visual cues, the messages, the contextual alerts that you give to the author as they're moving through the process. And the contextual part, I think, is really key, because that's where you're really going to start to make a difference with that 5%, is at the point where data doesn't exist and we think it should exist. Next area is around simplification. And this is around, again, using technology, automation to, again, make better guesses as to what the right data should be, as opposed to relying solely on the author selecting it or going in and updating their account before they start a submission, that sort of thing. And then finally, just a nod to what Shannon was just talking about, a little bit around standards. We thought we had this pretty well locked down, affiliations and funders and researchers, but there's more to be done around standardization of some of this data. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so signposts. The author's going on a journey. They're starting, they're logging into your journal, they're starting down the path to get their submission into your editorial workflow. And there's all sorts of different interaction points where we could be smarter about how we're asking them for the information. So Shannon just mentioned a perfect example of a place where we could do this. At the point someone logs in, if we know they're an author and they haven't updated their institution in 5 years, because a lot of journals have been around for a lot longer than 5 years, prompt them at that stage. If they're going to the author step and they've pre-populated all of their authors from a manuscript that they uploaded, and the primary or corresponding author is not marked as it doesn't have a ringgold, making sure that we provide the appropriate messaging around that about the importance of entering that accurately. And so a lot of this is really about reinforcing entry of data and making sure we get the data that may exist behind that submission that maybe the authors just overlooked. They're trying to get done with the submission. They just want to move through the process, get it into the queue. So that's a little bit about signposting. Next is a little bit around simplification. A lot of systems like ScholarOne, they utilize, pick lists for institutions or for funder data. They're relying on the author to select the right institution. They're relying on the author to make the right choice. And there's a lot of data in a lot of these lists. The Ringgold list is massive. And so what can we do to simplify the process for that author? Make sure that it's a good experience for the author, but use technology to provide better recommendations. So things like additional improvements around full extraction of data from your files. Both Aries, ScholarOne, we offer metadata extraction types of features where you can upload a PDF or a Word document and it pulls out the information. Do some additional work to really try to nail down what the affiliations and the funders might be for that paper based on all the context of that submission, the full text of that submission. Things like, again, better fuzzy matching. Did you mean? Sort of things where you rely on systems to be a little bit, allow some errors in wording or a typo, and better suggestions though based on what we think the author intended to search for, what we think they were trying to find. We have a lot of data on authors, both within your own journal systems, within other systems, Web of Science and Dimensions. And there's a lot of data that we already know about authors and funders and affiliations that they're tied to. Recommending previously selected funders and affiliations, again, if we don't have a match. And then finally, just the hierarchies themselves. This goes to the sort of too high of a level or too low of a level within the Ringgold list, but making sure that we're ranking those appropriately so that the author maybe, instead of seeing the right department level institution on the 20th result, putting it towards the top because we know there's funding tied to it and we think the author should have selected that one. Mm-hmm. So a little bit around just using technology to make the process easier, but also improve data capture. And then the last thing is just around standards. I'll just cover this one briefly. We're already doing a pretty good job, I think, just in terms of having standards for affiliations and funders that we pass up and downstream, ORCIDs for researchers. But the author role thing was, I think, interesting. This was a recent example of a publisher who they were using a different configuration for ScholarOne that allowed this concept of submitting agents, someone who's not an author on the paper to be the one that's in contact. And it was causing a mismatch downstream with agreements. About a 20% mismatch, I think, was the estimate, more or less. And we need to standardize a bit how these different configurations are used to make sure that they map downstream to RightsLink and other systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
So back to you, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. So, I mean, all of this is really just to say that, of course, we want to see a world where every manuscript has consistent, reliable affiliation data, that we are matched to the appropriate funding source. We're educating authors along the way and really automating, right, wherever we possibly can to relieve burden on the author. Not too big of a dream, right? But let's be honest, transformative agreements didn't exist at the inception of the products that we're talking about today. And so there is a lot of really taking off the hood, looking at our best practices and understanding from our partnership and our unique expertise that we bring to the table, how we can improve the author workflow. And I'm very happy to say that, this has just been a fruitful partnership and we're really working together to get this right. So we've come a long way, but these tricky challenges, they still remain. But interoperability and strategic partnerships are the path to us achieving that automation and ultimately increasing OA uptake. I want to thank Josh and Pierre for joining me today. Of course, if you want to pick my brain about anything specific by way of APCs, transformative agreements, I will hang around the CCC booth after this. But if anybody has any questions, we'd love to take them. I think we have about 5 minutes. Oh, thank you. And if you do have a question, they're just asking that you go up there because they're trying to record it.
A lot of pressure. You got to walk
I know.
up there. Yeah.
Every question is important. You'd be surprised how many people probably have the same.
So my question is actually to do with funding acknowledgements and how some eligibility for that coverage includes making sure that the institution or the funder is mentioned correctly in the funding acknowledgement.
Yep.
And so where might that come in this process?
Absolutely. So that is something that CCC has been investigating. So funder or institutional compliance. I think that really comes in more in the production stage. I know there's a lot of editors and support staff at the publishers that we work with, because the publishers are coming to us and saying, these folks are doing a lot of manual effort to identify those rules, apply those rules. Where RightsLink sits today, being an APC payment platform at its core, is really ensuring that the eligibility criteria of the deal by way of utilizing the either unlimited APC tokens or a prepaid account, that we're honoring that. But it is something that we're looking into actively. That's as much as I can say. Yeah.
She could have just said AI and just dropped the mic.
I know, right? Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then I think we can let you all go have a coffee, get ready for the keynote. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll see you around.